Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this German 2-ton half-track cargo truck SDKFZ 3A Maultier, which just rolls right off the tongue and isn't a mouthful at all. Let's just call it the Maultier, if I'm even pronouncing that right. This is a 1/56 or 28mm scale plastic kit made by Rubicon Models. The front of the box looks quite good and tells us of the variety of parts and options this kit has. It doesn't mention it on the box, but you can get a box body expansion that will work with this kit, and the Opel Blitz truck upon which the Maultier is based. The back of the box has a few paragraphs about the history of this vehicle, 2 examples of paint schemes with Vallejo paints listed, and an image of the included waterslide decal sheet. Inside the box we find bags full of plastic, 3 sprues and a slide moulded cab part. These parts all look rather good and neatly moulded, and it's no surprise that I didn't find any defects or flaws. Obviously there are mould lines, but they're so minor as to be almost negligible. Don't neglect them though, remove them. It shouldn't be too hard. There are quite a few parts in this kit. I believe some of these sprues are shared with Rubicon's Opel Blitz kit, which makes sense. This is pretty much an Opel Blitz with tracks. I quite like that there's a passenger included as well as a driver. These look okay, but maybe a little bit soft in detail. Everything else is quite sharp and crisply detailed. I have grown to expect this high level of quality from Rubicon. All the wheels for the regular Blitz are here. You could probably build that, but it would kind of defeat the purpose of buying a Maultier kit, wouldn't it? That means there are a lot of pieces that will be left over. Perhaps things like the extra wheels might make for nice loads for the back of the Maultier. This decal sheet is also included, and there's plenty of markings and license plates. These look pretty good. There should be plenty of decals left over for other projects if you need them. As always, a very nice instruction booklet is included. It's well laid out and easy to understand and follow. It points out where there are choices to make and which parts are optional, so definitely pay attention to this. Time to build. I start with the frame, which makes sense. There are 2 frame parts in this kit. One is for the wheeled version of the Blitz. However, this is the one you want to use to make the Maultier. As you can see, it's got a few more axle posts on which to mount the tracks. Onto the frame we can then attach the steering wheels. These have keying to ensure that you're installing them the right way up. This helps you be sure that you're placing the wheels so the flat spots are on the bottom. These go into place nice and easily and look pretty decent. I then attach this towing hook thing. There is a pin to guide this. The fit isn't too bad, but it is a little bit gappy. It's not the worst and it should be pretty easy to fix. You also have the option of adding a spare wheel on the upper side of the frame at this point, though I've opted not to, so I move straight to gluing the floor of the truck body into place. As you can see, there are 2 slots on the bottom where I applied the glue. The 2 support bits on the frame slot into these like so. This is pretty easy, just make sure you've got the floor part the right way around. The little square bit that hangs down should be at the vehicle's left rear. Next, it's time for tracks. These are nice single part track sets, which I rather like. The detailing is pretty nice, and the mould lines were minor. You can probably see where I've removed them with a file. There are pins to make installing these tracks very easy. The drive sprocket, which has the teeth, should be facing towards the front of the vehicle. I make sure the tracks are pushed all the way down onto the mounting pins, and then I add glue to secure them into place. Looks pretty decent so far. Next, I install the bottom half of the driver's cab and the fenders part. This is simple. There are 2 of these parts included in the kit, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure if they're different at all. Either way, I used part D10, because that's what the instructions said. There doesn't seem to be a lot of space between the drive sprocket and that mudguard. It looks odd to me, but it does fit, so who am I to complain? At this point, the instructions say to install the crew. I'm not going to use them, but I do like that a passenger is included as well as the driver. If you are going to include the crew, I would suggest leaving them out for now and paint them separately. It's a much better option than trying to paint them through the windshield and windows. Because I'm modelling an uncrewed vehicle, I will need to install the steering wheel. I've heard that having the ability to steer is really helpful. This part is quite easy to install. There's a little indentation into where the wheel should mount. The interior is pretty simple, but it looks fine. I don't imagine the real thing would have had a very elaborate interior either. Now it's time to work on the cargo bay body area thing. There's a few choices here. I'm building my Maultier as a cargo version, suitable for mid and late war. Installing the walls for the cargo area is pretty easy. They're moulded in such a way that they sit in place nicely. The only thing to look for is that they're as vertical as you can get them. To help with this, I use a side part to make sure the forward part is lined up nice and vertical and that there won't be any gaps in the corner. I glue the forward wall into place and leave it to dry. With the front wall installed nice and straight, the rest of the parts go into place with minimal effort using the first part as a guide. Doing it this way definitely helps keep any gaps to a minimum. Looks pretty good if you ask me. We could stop there, but you can extend the height of the cargo area with these 2-plank wall parts. I'm sure they have a more eloquent sounding name than that, but I don't know it. These go into place easily. They correspond with the slight bumps on the tops of the lower side panels. They sit in place fairly well, so I position them and then add glue, using capillary action to get it to soak in behind the part. Like the previous step, these go on very easily. You do have to be a little bit careful with the positioning, but it's not too hard at all, and I quite like them. There's a lot of nice detail that I think will look rather interesting when I get around to painting this model. There is an optional part that goes around the upper edges of the front cargo area. I think it might be folded down supports for the canvas roof, but I've chosen to leave that off, and I move on to the cab. It slides into place really easily, and it could be glued on now, but I'm leaving it unglued so that I can paint the interior separately. The fit is really snug, so the cab will stay there pretty well without glue, so if you wanted to, you could still play games with this without the cab just falling right off. If you're gluing the cab on now, be sure to pay attention to the options. There's an optional sign for the rooftop. It's a tow load indicator, which I guess is kind of like a safety placard you might see on a modern day truck. If you want to install that, there's a pair of holes you will need to drill into the roof to allow the sign to be installed. I'm not going to be installing it, so I don't drill any holes, which makes sense. There's a stowage rack for the roof and I'm going to be using that. There's a mounting point for the spare tyre on this rack. Rack. And onto that I glue the spare wheel. This is super easy. This is followed by whatever this fiddly little bit is. Maybe it's tools for changing the tyre or some kind of clamp to keep it in place. It's a little bit fiddly to get it nice and straight, but I got there eventually. Now for more fiddly things. This is a rack for jerry cans. Yes, rack joke again. It's not the simplest thing to install the 4 jerry cans into this, but with some patience and a lot of fiddling and nudging around of parts, I got it all together. Eventually. Using the work surface to keep things lined up was quite helpful. Once that assembly was complete, I glued it onto the rack. There are some slightly raised parts to help guide the positioning of this. Once that's in place, the assembly is ready to be glued to the cab roof. There's nothing to guide this, but it's not too hard to eyeball it and try to get it in the center of the roof. I think I may have put mine a tiny bit too far forward, but it's fine. Next comes the grille. This has a no-tech light on the left side. As the instructions say, if you don't want this part, simply trim it off. I've obviously left it on. The part is very easy to glue on and fits excellently. Then come the headlamps. There is a choice between regular headlamps or the kind I've used with the blackout cover. There's a pair of small indentations in the fender for these to be mounted to. It is a little bit fiddly, but it is much easier to get them in place without the cab being there. The finishing touches are to add the tools. I put the cab back in place to make sure I wasn't gluing these tools into the space the cab would occupy. That would obviously be a bad idea. You could imagine or probably see that it was a little bit fiddly to get these into place. But if you're quick, the glue will hold them into place in the indent in the fender, and you can nudge them into their final position before it sets too much. The tools should sit on the fender and not quite be in contact with the sides of the cab. I feel like having the cab off is going to make it a lot easier to paint the tools. And of course the interior of the cab, which can only be a good thing. And so, that's it. The Rubicon Models is complete. I don't have another one of these to compare this model with, but I have ordered the Warlord Maultier kit, which I will eventually build, and I will definitely do a comparison then. And if I remember, I'll come back and put a link in this video. I really like this kit. Not only does it look great, but there's a good amount of variety and optional parts. It looks as though you could actually build the Opel Blitz instead of the Maultier with this kit if you really wanted to, though that does seem a little bit silly. But that's something I really value in kits: flexibility and choice, especially when it results in lots of interesting and useful parts being left over. The build process was quite enjoyable. The instructions were, as usual, simple, well laid out, and easily followed. Everything fit together well, and there wasn't anything that needed modification or any work beyond removing the mold lines to fit it to the model. The details are quite good. It is still a gaming model, of course, but it looks very well detailed to me. If you want to make it look just that little bit more realistic, the instructions have a guide for cutting out window glass. You could use some clear scrap plastic for this. It would be nice if a clear plastic part was included for this, but I'm sure it wouldn't be too hard to do for yourself anyway. I think this model looks very nice, and when I do eventually get around to painting it, it's going to look excellent. There's a load of interesting details that should make painting quite fun. So if you're looking for a nice mule for your German army's haulage needs, this is certainly a very good choice. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section below. And of course, if you haven't done so already, feel free to subscribe to me here on YouTube, follow me on social media, and watch me live stream on Twitch. And if you really like the things I do, please consider helping to support the channel over at patreon.com. Links to all of those are in the description below. I shall return soon, so until then, happy Maultiering and thanks for watching. Farewell.